Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, What We Can't Not Talk About, the podcast of the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture. So, after a brilliant episode with Christopher West, with whom we discussed the theology of the body, and in which we warned ourselves, I would say, and the audience about the dangers of the so-called contraceptive mentality, I think it's just fitting to host an episode on family planning. Um, yeah, family planning. We should call it maybe natural family planning. That's how a lot of people call it. But I think I have good reasons to omit that term for now, because that is what it is. It is a family planning. So we're going to discuss today, we're going to discuss methods to space and plan childbearing in our lives. Again, we're going to discuss this because we've discussed about the contraceptive mentality, right? So what does it mean to not accept the generative nature of our body? And so now we need to discuss what it means to accept and to leave the generative nature and purpose of our body. So these methods, however, the one that we will discuss, the so-called natural methods, do not contradict the theologies of our bodies, where by theologies, we exactly mean, their larger scope, the metaphysical goal of our bodies, the bodies of men and females. And these methods of family planning also would not contradict the nature of marriage, where marriage is interpreted as a mutual gift of self, permanent and complete mutual gift, where there is nothing is reserved for ourselves, right? We don't preserve anything, we give it all. And so to address this issue, since, as you can tell, I'm not exactly nor necessarily an expert, even though podcasters need to be expert on a little bit of everything. But to address this issue, I've invited a true expert in the field, Grace Emily Stark. Good morning, Emily, and welcome on our show.
Good morning, Marianna. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for accepting the invitation. And I said you're a true expert, but how about you introduce yourself with a couple of words so you justify my description of you as such in the natural family planning word?
All right. Well, first of all, I didn't know I was going to be following Christopher West. So, wow, pressure's on. But my name is Grace Emily Stark, the editor of an organization called Natural Womanhood. We're a nonprofit organization based out of San Antonio, Texas, that works to promote natural family planning and fertility awareness-based methods for women and couples, young women who don't need to be married to learn about their body, learn about their cycles, learn about their fertility, and couples who are looking to use these methods for family planning, for spacing children. And so the reason why I feel really passionate about the work at Natural Womanhood and why I'm involved with it is because my husband and I have been teaching the symptothermal method of fertility awareness for a long time now, for 7-8 years, through the Couple to Couple League. And they're a wonderful organization, but they are a Catholic organization. And you'll find the more you delve into this space that most of the organizations that teach or promote fertility awareness, natural family planning, come from a religious bent, because for a long time, the only people who knew about this stuff, cared about this stuff, were Catholics. And so the CEO of Natural Womanhood, he and his wife, over 10 years ago now, realized that there was a real need to meet other people where they were at with this information, that it wasn't just Catholics who could benefit from knowing a little bit more about how their bodies worked, how pregnancy happens, how you can use the natural rhythms built into your body to space children, and even beyond that, how you can use that information that your body's giving you as a woman to really use it as a fifth vital sign. So use it as a way to monitor your overall health and use your charts that you use to track your cycle. to really as a diagnostic tool in the hands of the right doctor. And I know for folks who are totally unfamiliar with fertility awareness and natural family planning, I threw out some terms there that
which we
we'll
will
definitely break
yeah,
down.
we will. We absolutely will. And also,
Yeah.
we talked about spacing out children, but I think it's also, as you said, fertility awareness is also, we know how many women having children very late are dealing with infertility. And so it's not just spacing in order not to have 15 children, but and it's trying to understand our body's work. And then you mentioned this fifth vital sign, and I know it's actually an article you wrote that I had the pleasure to read recently of how our the menstrual cycle for women is the fifth vital sign. But before we go there, I think there was something that I wanted to mention later on, but you brought it up now. How the organizations that were doing natural family planning were necessarily religious, and many of them were Catholic, and of course Christopher West did not hide that we don't hide that what we believe in. But I think it's interesting for the audience that is approaching us from a lay perspective. I think it's very interesting to look at this issue for 1 second, stepping aside, moving away from the natural family planning, thinking of the word and human beings in a broader way. And we recently read Del Noce here with some of the students, and there is something that Del Noce, as many other philosophers in the mid of the 20th century, realized, which is we live in a world where it's not that religion has been set aside, but is the religious dimension. So when we talk about methods of fertility that do not only involve, merely mechanisms that reduce us to matter, we don't need to embrace necessarily one faith, but we just need to keep the question open, right? And saying, maybe, even if we don't have an answer, but maybe this thing that I call soul, or these things that I call emotions and feelings, maybe they have something to tell me about myself that goes beyond what science for now can also measure and record, right? So the suggestion that I think that the religious organizations, then they also embrace one particular answer, but I think that the reason many times they can be ahead of times is that they acknowledge this missing piece, right? So the metaphysical dimension, the religious dimension, the unmeasurable dimension, right? And talking about unmeasurable, we know, there are many conceptions that happen, with infertile couples because there is real love, or, like the way our bodies work is very much related to our emotions. Stressful times are the sources of all sorts of diseases, and stress is always the last cause of every possible diagnosis we get. One day we will understand what the stress really is. But so I just wanted to mention this to help people who have an initial skepticism for methods that have been promoted by religious organizations as if they required embracing a particular belief.
Right. And where we have really made some inroads and found some, interesting partnerships in this space are with kind of the more quote unquote crunchy folks who, take that holistic approach to their food, their medicine, the people who look for hormone-free meat and milk and, pesticide-free vegetables, and then wake up one morning and go, wait, I'm shopping at the farmer's market, but then I'm taking a pill full of synthetic hormones every single morning. What am I doing? And more we're seeing young women come to that realization who have this passion for, living naturally, really, like waking up and just wondering, what the heck am I doing? What are the alternatives? And so we are finding there's this big interest in young women who are of that natural, crunchy bent, who are interested in these methods. And that's where you see things like the explosion of popularity in the femtech space. So the wearable devices for measuring your basal body temperature and tracking your cycle with an app and that sort of thing. And I have opinions on all those things, and some of them are better than others. But I think at the end of the day, as long as we're getting young women interested in learning more about their bodies, learning that their fertility is a feature and not a bug of their feminine bodies. It's wonderful. And I'm so excited to see this growing interest in young women in particular. And just this hunger for, my husband and I, over the years, as we have taught couples, we have heard the same refrain so many times when we get these couples who come in, and some of them are skeptical. Some of them are only coming to take the class to learn the method because their priest told them that they needed to before they could get married, or, there's all sorts of reasons people come in, and some are very skeptical. And once they start learning the science behind it, learning, oh, there's data to back this up. Oh, there's actual biological mechanisms that are happening here that we can track and that can tell us things. The overwhelming refrain that we hear from women in particular is, why wasn't I taught this earlier? Like, some women even get a little bit angry, rightfully so, because they think, why did no one think that I was intelligent enough to learn this earlier on, or that I would be interested enough in taking care of myself to learn this earlier on? So you get this righteous indignation, to my mind, from a lot of women who say, why was sex ed in public school boiled down to, how to put a condom on a banana? And yet I never learned that there's about a week of every single month of my cycle that I can actually get pregnant, and that I can determine that week with, up to 99% efficacy with perfect use of some of these particular methods. And that actually rivals and is better than many of the mainstream contraceptives. It's better. It has a better perfect use rate than the pill even does.
Yeah. And we could talk, and I would like to talk now about the side effects, because I think that we all start to get interested in things, from some things that we start hearing about. And of course, we all have a lot of, as women here, but this is also a program for men, and I want to mention some things about them too.
Yeah.
You mentioned, the being bio, whatever is the English
Biomarkers.
bio. Yeah. All right. And there is something, Austin is the place for it. Like I go out and I meet all this, young ladies that love to write and to eat very green, and they do not go to the grocery anymore. Yes.
Yeah.
But there's not only women like that, there's men.
Yeah.
Plenty of them. And like, are you serious? Like, do you really want everything to be bio, but then you want to have your children with someone who is taking lots of hormones of all sorts, and you actually do not know what is happening in their body, right? Like, so there needs to be, if you want to be, to have your religion with then just be consistent. You need to stick to it. On that front, I know that you won a you were awarded the Robert Novak Alumni Fund Journalism Fellowship to research and to write about the story of birth control side effects, and the growing interest in natural methods of family planning. But you are definitely an expert on the side effects, and I know that there's been a petition, I think it's still open maybe, to the FDA. So what is it that both men with girlfriends or planning on dating someone and women who are recommended a pill to regulate their fertility might want to know that they're not usually told?
I mean, just point blank is that the pill is not nearly as innocuous, as safe as we've been led to believe. That's what our entire petition to the FDA is about. We have decades worth of research about risks and side effects that come with these methods that have to do with the synthetic hormones that are in them. And they have wide-reaching effects all over the body. It's folly to believe that you can tinker with your hormones, which affect literally every bodily system, and think that it's all just going to stay localized, just, keep you from ovulating, and it won't do anything else, and we're seeing, especially now as, generations of women have grown up on the pill, we're seeing the long-term effects that come with taking it for 10 years, 20 years, even 30 years in people who were given it as teenagers. And so things like, nutritional deficiencies that are caused that might not make a big deal for, a couple of years. But what are we looking at 10 years down the line when you've been chronically deficient in all your most important B vitamins, because we know that the pill does that? What do we see from women who have not been ovulating for all these years? And we know that ovulation is how women build bone density, particularly when they're in their teens and young 20s. And if you haven't been ovulating and you haven't been building that bone density, what are your bones going to look like as a 30, 40-year-old? And so
bone density, just for the ones that, this is among, especially the way I learned it, white Caucasian women are at the highest risk of osteoporosis. Osteoporosis means you're 50, you fall down the stairs, break your leg. It's not a pleasant life ever after. So bone density is not just, something that the doctor is going to measure. It determines the rest of your life.
And not even breaking bones when you fall, but your teeth can be affected. Your cavities, your teeth can fall out. We have stories from women on Natural Womanhood who have been on the Depo-Provera birth control shot in particular.
Which, honestly, talking about Depo-Provera, I wrote my thesis in 2008 in law school about the effects that were documented. I thought it was illegal
isn't it
by
terrible?
Now. Yeah, but I thought I honestly I was surprised to know. I hope we're not getting in trouble here for saying this, but I would like to understand what. And I know your husband is a doctor. I mean, this petition, can we just make it clear? These petitions are signed by doctors. We're not talking about, we want to be the crazy green.
Oh, yeah, no. The petition on the Natural Womanhood website to the FDA, first of all, is not saying, you need to make birth control illegal. You need to take birth control away. The only method that we've said should be taken off the market is Depo-Provera, because it is heinous what it does to women's bodies.
What exactly does it do? Documented.
Women who have been on it for years, which you're not supposed to be on it for more than, I believe, 2 or 3 years, but that gets ignored in practice. There are women who in their 20s and 30s have the bones of like 70-year-old women. They'll fall, a normal fall that would normally not hurt, a 25-year-old, and they've broken hips and a wrist. Just crazy things like that. And it also definitively increases your risk of HIV transmission. There have been several very well done studies that have borne that out. And the fact that they use Depo-Provera in sub-Saharan Africa primarily, and the rates of HIV there, I mean, it doesn't take a wide leap to say, what are we doing? What's going on here? So it does. And it also, we have stories of women who have been on it just, for a year and told that, once it wears off, you'll be able to get pregnant. Well, 1, 2, 3 years down the line of it wearing off, and they're still unable to get pregnant. So the thing with it is it's not a device that you can take out. It's in your bloodstream, and there's no way of getting rid of it once it's in you until it wears off or doesn't. It's effects that it. So because there are so many other methods on the market that women can choose from, our petition does say, there are outsized risks with Depo-Provera, and for that reason, it should be taken off the market. But for everything else, the pills, the IUDs, the implants, we just advocate that the FDA, it requires pharmaceutical companies to be more upfront about the evidence-based risks and side effects, because right now, as it stands, women and their doctors often have no idea just how bad these hormones can be for women.
You only have that very, 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 very fast ad at the end of the market, like any and it ends, but like any goes that. Everything, like it ends like
exactly
less than less than half of a second with all the side effects. But
the wording is done such that women believe that they're only at increased risks, especially for things like blood clots, the venous thrombo embolism events,
which with the COVID vaccination, I mean, proved to be a big deal.
Yeah, for women, it is a big risk for a lot of different things. But the the wording is done on the packaging for birth control such that it misleads women into thinking that their risk is only elevated if they're 35, overweight, or smoking. And the truth is that your risk is elevated for blood clots, no matter who you are, no matter your age, no matter your weight, no matter whether or not you smoke, compared to the average woman who's not on these drugs.
Yeah.
And so there's all sorts of misleading tactics. It's very much like, big tobacco back in the 60s and 70s, where they just continually purposefully seem to mislead women about these drugs and make them seem like they're just effective and they don't do anything else and it's okay. And that's where we see women going into their doctors and being gaslighted. I'm on this pill and I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't feel like I'm myself anymore. Or I'm on the IUD and it's excruciating and I hate it. And you have their doctors telling them, oh no, it doesn't do that. The pill doesn't do that. The IUD doesn't do that. Even, in some cases, outright refusing. I mean, you can stop taking a pill, right, of your own volition, but you really should have a doctor remove your IUD, and you definitely need a doctor to remove.
And also, I mean, for a lot of women that have been suggested, the pill to regulate their fertility, then they're left with not knowing where to go. Because if they refuse, we have a lot of doctors that say, well, I don't know how to help you unless you want.
Yes.
Right. You want other hormones to ovulate.
Right.
So stepping back now, and for those, followed us saying, what the heck are they talking about when they talk about natural family planning? What are we talking about, and why is what distinguishes contraception from natural family planning? And honestly, I would like to call it family planning because I don't know why we need to call it natural. Like,
yeah, I get what you're saying with that, definitely, because it should be the normal way we do things, right?
Yeah.
Contraception, contracept is literally against conception. When you're taking a pill, when you're using a device, you're actively suppressing your body's ability to conceive, mostly by preventing your body from ovulating. And so it's the biggest lie that women have ever been sold, that birth control will regulate your cycle or regulate your fertility. Because the truth is, you don't have a cycle when you're on birth control. You don't at all, because you need to ovulate and menstruate. That's your menstrual cycle, is ovulating and then menstruating. You do neither of those things when you're on the pill or the IUD, the hormonal ones anyway, because they actively suppress your body from being able to ovulate, your ovaries from releasing an egg every month.
Could we just repeat? Because maybe it's absolutely obvious for a few of the people listening to us, but I'm starting to understand that there are a lot of things that are not obvious that to me are obvious. So to the girls or to the boyfriends of those girls listening, yes, she's, every 28 days something happens. Doesn't mean she's ovulating. Something is caused by the pill. Her body is not working in the meantime. You are putting the woman on a pause. Am I correct?
Yeah. So some people compare it to almost being like pregnant or being in menopause. It's not quite either of those things, but they're a good way to get people thinking about the fact that it stops you from ovulating, which naturally happens in pregnancy and naturally happens when you're in menopause. Those are normal hormonal processes that stop you from ovulating, pregnancy and menopause. It's an abnormal synthetic hormone cocktail in your pill or your IUD or your implant when you're on birth control that's stopping your body from ovulating. And if you don't ovulate, you don't release an egg, which can't then be fertilized, and you can't get pregnant. Or so the theory goes, because sometimes you do ovulate. You have breakthrough ovulation. To quote what Jeff Goldblum in the Jurassic Park movies, life always finds a way. Sometimes, you take your pill a day late or later in the day than you normally do. And your ovary might release an egg and it could end up getting fertilized and you could end up conceiving. But there are other mechanisms that then will kick in sometimes with these synthetic hormones where they'll thin your mucus, your cervical mucus, because you actually need 3 things to get pregnant, which is another thing people don't know, is you don't only need an egg and a sperm, but you need good quality, fertile cervical mucus, because that's what allows the sperm to be protected and swim up through the reproductive tract so that they can actually make it to an egg. So without those 3 things, conception can't happen. And so if you do end up ovulating when you're on the pill, these secondary and tertiary mechanisms of action kick in, where it chronically thins your cervical mucus. So it makes it less likely that the sperm can get up to where they need to go. And the other thing it does is it chronically thins the lining, the endometrium.
So which, as we said before, could become a problem if at some point in your life you want to stop and you want to start.
Yeah. And that's one theory behind why women have a hard time conceiving after Depo-Provera in particular, is that it almost seems to atrophy the lining of the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, where a newly conceived life would implant if it were thick enough.
And could you agree that the reason why, natural family planning might be a little more metaphysical to understand when we come down to why condoms? I mean, I think that for us is very evident why condoms are not okay, but the medical reasons then become less, maybe, because true, natural family planning, we will say it is more effective in preventing, but there is something, that in order to understand why condoms disrupt love and the union, I think people need to be willing to grasp that there is a dimension about human sexuality that is not reducible to the pleasure that it causes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've heard it compared to, giving someone a hug through plastic. You're holding back some of yourself. And on that note too, just if we're, in keeping with wanting to appeal to more of a secular audience that says, okay, well, but I don't really, that's a little too far gone for me to think of things that way. I don't see the big deal. Someone's not putting hormones in their body. I get why you don't want to do that, but where do condoms matter, And actually, there are folks who use natural family planning and fertility awareness in tandem with condoms. And it lowers your effectiveness of your fertility awareness method, because your family planning methods that you're using, they're only as good as your least effective method, right? And so if you're using a fertility awareness method and you're using condoms during your fertile period, which is when people use them so that they don't have to abstain, because that's your other choice. If that condom slips or breaks during your most fertile period, that's not the fault of your fertility awareness method. That's the fault of the condom. And so that's where, science is actually on the side of abstaining, using a fertility awareness method and abstaining when you're most fertile, instead of, using something else. If you're trying to be as effective as possible at, preventing pregnancy during that particular cycle.
Yeah, because as we said, natural family planning methods involves methods that are not contraceptive, so they are not preventing conception. So by allowing the union to happen, and of course, as you mentioned, one of them is abstention during, at this point, very limited period of times. Now, some people are afraid of it, but I know, and people can go on your website and read all the stories of how actually as it is true, we fast a lot because then we love the meal after fasting, right? Like there is a joy that comes from deprivation that, and we live in a world inundated by pornography where, kids, and we can say kids, very young people are not finding any pleasure in a real life engagement with a woman, because they're so, I mean, I think that maybe to their brain, even this makes a lot of sense, right? That an abstention that lasts 5 days might,
8-ish. is
8-ish.
the
Okay.
more realistic
Okay.
average. Yeah. And it's really interesting because in conversations that we've had with couples, especially those who have used contraception before and then moved to fertility awareness, the men are sometimes hesitant when they hear that there's going to be a period of time where abstaining is necessary. But then as they get into it and they practice it, they almost become more enthusiastic about it, because it's calling them to something better. Because when they really, get into it and they realize, like, this is how I'm honoring my wife. This is how I am putting aside my desires for her good, for her the good of the other. Because if you've agreed that, you don't want to get pregnant this cycle, and you know how bad birth control can be for your wife, and not only her physical health, but her mental and emotional health as well, then there's no other recourse but to see fertility awareness as something that's calling you, especially as a man, to calling you to love your spouse better when you're putting
Yeah.
aside your desire to will her good,
And
essentially.
I really love that you mentioned it, because before recording the podcast, I have asked some of the men friends that I have. So, I'm going to talk about natural family planning, and I know that for men, it's just like, okay, they just want to listen many times, but they don't really. So, what are the questions that come from a man?
Mhm.
And one of I think that somehow the question is also, how do I learn and how do I talk about it if I'm not in a relationship? Because usually,
Mhm.
right, it's the woman says, okay, come with me, I'll
Yeah.
tell you. There's a sense of, being embarrassed and like not knowing how to understand and how to. So I'll have another question afterwards, but like, let's start from there. What should they do?
So there are some programs for teens that are really great that are popping up. Well, actually, the one in particular I'm thinking of, Teen Star, has been around for a few decades now. And they have a teen girl and a teen boy program, which is great because there is such a dearth of outreach, well, to all teens in general, about a holistic approach to sex and fertility, but especially to boys. And right now we're working on some programs geared toward teen girls. And then I hope that we can start figuring out ways to reach out to more teen boys. But yeah, right now the reality is that unless you were lucky enough to go to a school that had a program for you, or unless you had parents who were just very open and engaged with you as a kid and a teen, you're probably not going to be exposed to any of this information as a male until you're in a relationship. And that's okay, in that you don't have to know the ins and outs of the menstrual cycle, I think, as a male, until you're in a relationship necessarily. I think it's good to definitely have something of an understanding and an outline. But if you're, a male listening and you're in your 20s and looking for a serious relationship and realizing you know nothing about the menstrual cycle, I don't think you have to fear that you're hopeless, that something went wrong, or that yeah, I'm trying to figure
But it
out where
might be
I'm.
helpful, what we already said, it might be helpful for them to know that, as you might not want to date, and I'm not suggesting that, but like, you might not want to date someone who drinks a lot or that smokes a lot,
Uh-huh.
maybe, another thing you might not want her to do is to know that she hasn't ovulated for the last 15 years of her life, right? Because maybe she's 30 and started the pill when she was 15, right?
Mhm.
So if you're worried about her health condition, if you love her, you might want to ask her, have you heard about this? Or, even when meeting someone, like having a conversation, as we have conversations like, oh, why are you buying your meat at the grocery and you're not, right? Like, just being a little more concerned
Yeah. Yeah.
about
No, I
the.
think it is important. And I wish that there were more resources out there. For now, I think it's kind of up to, like, the way that I'm raising my son is that he's going to know this stuff. whether he wants to or not. And, I'm introducing things to him and my daughters in age appropriate ways. A big part of it is educating parents so that kids can grow up just with this knowledge of their bodies and the goodness of their whole body, and what it means to be a man and a woman. I think that that's where a lot of it boils down to, is just encouraging parents not to be afraid to answer their kids' questions in age appropriate ways, to not be afraid to not feel like you need to hide. I'm thinking in particular of, your menstrual cycle as a woman. If you have little kids at home, they're going to follow you into the bathroom, right? I mean, that's just what they do. And when I have been on my period and my kids have followed me into the bathroom and they've seen, what I'm doing in the bathroom, they ask questions and I don't try to hide it. I'm not like, hey, come in here. I'm going to,
Yeah.
I'm going to use the bathroom. Come see what I'm doing. But if they come in and they ask questions, I have come up with, just some really simple explanations like, yes, mommy's bleeding right now because there isn't a baby in my tummy. And
Yeah.
normally that blood would be inside of me to keep a baby warm and cozy, but there's no baby this month. And so it's coming out and, it doesn't hurt and it'll stop in a few days. And then more blood will come in case there's a baby inside of me. And just kind of these very, very simple explanations for my kids already, I think my 5-year-old boy and my 3-year-old girl have a better understanding right there, like baseline understanding of the menstrual cycle and fertility than your average American high schooler. And all it took was a trip to the bathroom,
And could we dispel a myth that people who use natural family planning end up having 8, 9 kids necessarily?
Not necessarily. I think people sometimes look at big families who use natural family planning and they think it's a failure of the method. But if you've ever struggled to get pregnant, and you realize those big families can actually be a sign of how well a method works, because increasingly today, it's not easy for people to get pregnant and they have no idea how to maximize their chances of getting pregnant. And that's kind of the other side of the coin with fertility awareness, is that absolutely when you can get pregnant every month, which means you have a really good chance of getting pregnant if you want to, right?
Yeah, and can we talk about on that side? Because I am convinced that the people listening to us will have a lot more fertility problems than problems of big families, because the age of marriage is later, but also because of all the things that we have done wrong growing up, and I put myself in that group. Why is fertility awareness better than IVF? Or, there are other methods out there in order to conceive and have kids. So why would still natural family planning, fertility awareness be a better method?
Well, so on average, a couple who's, I don't know, probably 35 or younger have a 90% chance of conceiving after a year of just having random intercourse. Within 6 months, a couple who's 35 and younger have a 90% chance of conceiving if they're tracking cycles and having sex when they know they can get pregnant. And actually, for a lot of folks, it's even less. It can be 3 months. And it's because when you are in this rhythm of knowing and understanding your body, when you can get pregnant. You're not messing around, thinking, okay, we have to just have sex at least every other. That's what the typical doctor will tell you, just have sex every other night for, in perpetuity, and it'll happen eventually. Well, no, we can get quite a bit more targeted than that. A lot more targeted than that. And a lot of people find that just that understanding of, oh, this is when I can get pregnant. When I'm seeing these signs from my body, when I'm seeing this cervical mucus, when I'm feeling this certain way, that tells me I'm at my most fertile. And a lot of folks find that if they were having problems getting pregnant before, just knowing that information can be a complete game changer, a total game changer, right? Because you're not flying blind anymore. You're not just throwing darts randomly. With folks who are older than 35, if your fertility is naturally waning, it's even better then to be able to pinpoint and target when you're fertile. And, if you're younger than 35, older than 35, no matter your age, there could be some hormonal issues at play, which you can also pick up on via your charting, via monitoring your cycles, which in the hands of a doctor who's trained to look at a woman's charts and understand her menstrual cycle and do the right kinds of blood work at the right time and the right kinds of, ultrasounds if you need to, that sort of thing, on your ovaries, your uterus, to see what's going on, what are we working with here. Those kinds of doctors can help improve someone's natural fertility to the point where they can conceive naturally, and we don't have to do these kind of unnatural things like IVF, where we're just creating a child in a petri dish and then implanting it and hoping it takes. And so the fertility awareness, natural family planning approach in conjunction with restorative reproductive medicine is much more aligned with, what is the body not doing that it should be doing naturally? How can we fix whatever is wrong? Infertility is often a symptom of an issue. It's not the issue itself. It's a symptom of something else.
The fifth. You were not the first one, but like the fifth vital sign that we were mentioning. I will link.
Exactly.
We will link to that article on this episode. But since you mentioned doctors, there are two things that I wanted. So the other myth to dispel is that the natural family planning are hard methods and time consuming, and we'll get there. But before that, since you mentioned doctors and ultrasounds and blood work, we know that these things come with a cost.
Mm-hmm.
Something interesting happened. I think that we still have coverage for it until December of this year, but I don't know what's happening next. Something happened with the Biden administration and natural family planning. Do you want to say more about it?
Yeah, well, so fortunately, the Alliance Defending Freedom got on the case and they were able to put a stay on the change that was going to go into effect. But to give background, the Affordable Care Act back in 2016 actually started including instruction in fertility awareness methods underneath covered services for women's preventative health services. So underneath the umbrella of contraception, women needed to be able to get these services without even having a copay. And fertility awareness methods were included in that because they can be used for pregnancy prevention and quite effectively. And so a lot of folks didn't realize this. There were some savvy practitioners, like the plaintiff in the case that you just brought up, a nurse practitioner, I believe, out of Texas, who had been,
of all places,
Texas. Who had been using, that to get coverage for her patients, for instructing them in fertility awareness methods, and kind of in the dead of night type of thing. The Biden administration, with no notice, no explanation, said that they were going to, well, they didn't even say it. They rewrote what was a covered service and did not. And they very noticeably omitted fertility awareness methods where it was before previously in the clause under women's preventative health services. And so Dr. Tammy Jo, who's the plaintiff in the case suing the Biden administration, is working with the Alliance Defending Freedom to say, okay, well, you can't just change an entitlement. You can't just change, what's covered without, they didn't even open it up to a comment period. There wasn't a notice. They just didn't do anything the way they were supposed to. And so ADF sued them, and it was going to go into effect in December. But now they're kind of battling it out in court. They got a judge to say, no, you have to keep coverage open until we figure this out. So yeah. And there was no explanation for it at all. They just removed it and kind of, I think, hoped nobody would notice. But there were folks who were benefiting from it, and they noticed.
Gynecologist visits are expensive, so it's an important thing that these things are covered. And for those who have engaged in vitro fertilization, or like, those things are very expensive too. So if you could prevent those expenses by cheaper things that you could learn very early on about your own body, that probably would be better.
Oh,
What?
yeah. Oh, we could save so much money for women and for couples just by giving them this information earlier
Yeah.
on.
And
And
you,
even if it goes to the level of needing to do the blood work, of needing to do some ultrasounds, that sort of thing, you're still on the whole going to be out so much less money than you
Yeah.
would be 1, 2, 3 IVF cycles in. Because on average, it takes 3 cycles to be
Yeah.
effective. So,
And, someone was also pointing out the youngest, I think the oldest child of IVF is maybe 45 now.
yeah, she's in her 40s.
Yeah. So we don't really know. We don't know. We know that there are certain maybe correlation issues. We don't know if what causes certain more problems with people that are born in a different way. But these technologies are new. Instead of knowing
Yeah.
how our body works is just knowing how they've worked forever. So the other myth that I wanted to dispel, I wanted to mention something before I forget. Evolutionary biology has shown that women, while they're ovulating, tend to attract men.
Mhm.
So if you're single, taking the pill forever, and you think you're good looking, and no one ever comes after you, there is something there are this just natural hormones and natural behaviors that we have because we are also animals, right?
Oh,
That's
there
what we
are
can
some fascinating sociological experiments that have been done in this regard. There was one, I forget where it was done, but strippers who were ovulating made, I forget what percentage more than
amazing. I'm sorry.
their
I
their
just find,
coworkers
yeah,
who
and
were,
this is the
not
part of me
or
that
on the
is
pill.
very, very, very bodily oriented. Like we are embodied soul and we are
Yes.
animals too. So
Yep.
there is a knowledge that our brain have, accumulated with
Yep.
our evolution for millennia and,
Yep.
for millions of years. And
The other fascinating one is the sweaty t-shirt study, where they have found that when you're on the pill as a woman, you are more attracted to men who have an immune system that's like yours,
yes.
which evolutionarily is not beneficial. It's beneficial to be attracted to someone with a very different immune system for the health of your offspring, right? Well, so women on the birth control pill they had them smell a bunch of sweaty t-shirts, and the men whose immune systems using some chemical or hormone or something, I forget, I don't know how exactly they determined this. It was some marker, immune system marker. But the men who had more alike immune systems, their sweaty t-shirts were more attractive in smell to women on the pill. And then the women who weren't on the pill, the sweaty t-shirts of the men who were less like them in immune system.
So basically you pick the better option.
You pick a better mate.
Yeah.
Potentially, if you are naturally cycling and not suppressing your fertility. And there's some different theories into why that is, but there's enough little data points out there. And a really, really fascinating book on all this stuff that we've been talking about today is called This Is Your Brain on Birth Control.
Amazing. We'll link to that too.
Yeah, by a evolutionary psychologist, I want to say, out of TCU. Her name is Sarah Hill. And this book is absolutely fascinating. And she's, says, none of this is definitive. Some of these studies are not reproducible or haven't been reproduced, but there's enough data points out there that should make us say, maybe if I'm altering my hormones, I might be altering who I am, what I'm interested in, who I'm interested in. There's enough out there.
Especially if you're very, if you're so material to the point that you don't believe in any religious reasons for doing the things you do or for having certain goals in life where you don't have this metaphysical dimension in you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then even more so, if we really are just a connection of our neurons and cells and then, the hormones that run through your body, then of course they're going to determine whether you're going to go dancing.
So that's what
tonight
she
or not.
says, because I don't believe she's religious at all. She says you are your hormones. And so if you're changing your hormones, you are changing who you are. And she doesn't advocate necessarily for women to just not be on the pill ever because of that. But she says, women need to know. They need to be able to make an informed decision for themselves, which again is the premise behind our petition at Natural Womanhood, is let women have this information. They need this information. And often when they do have it, they're like, what? Why am I on this? Why was I ever told it was a good thing for me to go on this? I'm mad about it. And what can I do differently?
And you mentioned again women, but I really think this message goes out to men. If you love them and you want to be
Yes.
the provider, the man responsible, you want to have a healthy woman, you want to start healthy relationships, there is no way you can let her tell you. Men want to be in charge. That's their natural calling, is to be in charge, and so there is all the room for them to be in charge with it and to help, and to participate in this. So there is, we could have gone deeper into what actually it looks like, but I just promise that it's very easy to this, all the things about, oh, it's so complicated, you need to take temperature, blah, blah. It's not true. It's easy. It requires a little bit of practice, but we will link to the information, of course, to your website,
Yeah.
so that anyone interested, and I hope we have generated interested in people who had never heard about this, so that they can look it up and know. Another anecdote that I wanted to close with that I found very interesting. I know that UT has a lot of athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And probably you already know where I want to go.
Yeah.
So the women athletes,
Yeah.
what is it that they need to know and that they don't know, and that, natural family planning would be good for them?
Yeah. I mean, there's more and more out there about how women, which I mean, duh, women are not men. We're not built like men. We
Well,
shouldn't train
careful what
like
you
men.
say.
No, I'll say it.
Okay.
And we shouldn't train like men when we're athletes. And a lot of the training of elite female athletes is patterned after how we train men. And when you're on the birth control pill and you're not cycling, and I guess you can kind of follow that male centric pattern of training. But if you're a woman who wants to respect your natural cycle and work with that, there are some really interesting programs out there. There's actually at UPenn, they have the Penn Center for the Female Athlete, and they are doing some interesting things where they're coordinating their athletes' training with their cycles. And even the women's soccer team did this a few years ago, and there were a bunch of articles written about it.
And why is that? Why is that important?
Because at different times of your cycle, like when you're menstruating, you really should not be going out all hard, on your training. You shouldn't be weightlifting. You shouldn't be, doing super intense cardio during that time. You should be resting. You should be stretching. You should be doing Pilates and yoga. When you're, in other parts of your cycle, that's when you do naturally have more energy. When you're naturally going to be able to do things that are a little bit more rigorous, and it can actually inform when you're most likely to get injuries, sports injuries. Young girls with ACL tears, there's probably a lot of that could be prevented, because we actually know that at different parts of your cycle, your ligaments are more elastic and more prone to those kinds of injuries. So if we were actually treating women and training young women like women, with an eye to their cycle, and how we let that inform how we train them, we could actually probably, improve their athletic performance
without having this myth that in order to be great athletes, you need to renounce your femininity, right? Like,
right.
Which has been true. I think it has been true. I believe I'm a true feminist, because, we should be able to get results without renouncing to our nature. Without renouncing, right, being mothers and
absolutely
and having and instead it looks like we got to be the CEOs of, but by becoming men.
Yeah, to becoming more like men. Yeah, it's all contraception, abortion. It all plays into a male normative culture that says everyone, in order to achieve anything, to be of any value, needs to be more like the normative body, and that's a male body.
Which I think is also very boring for men, right?
Yeah.
Because they're dating
I
themselves.
should hope so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so having said that, Grace, I hope this episode was not boring for men, as it wasn't. I'm sure it wasn't for the ladies listening, but I'm pretty sure we did a good job having the men involved. Um, and for those of them, that want to know more, I also know again, you and your husband are, first you teach these things to couples, but there's a lot of programs out there that they can that anyone can take and learn from. So again, I will provide all the information, and I must say it has been delightful and also quite amusing to talk to you.
Thanks.
And I wish you the best. And Natural Womanhood is a great, great organization that is doing a lot of good. So I again encourage everyone to check it out. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode of our show, What We Can't Not Talk About. If you did like the episode, remember to share it among your friends. Do not forget to subscribe, and if you can, please donate to the Austin Institute. Your donations make it possible for us to continue to do this, but above all, they support our local programming and the important, if not crucial, research of our fellows. Thank you.